Greetings all, it's Max and we're back. More from the blithering idiots at Peter Ruckman's school. After these videos here that me and Ed are doing, they ought to put up a big sign that says no refunds, because they're going to have some problems here with their students. This is where these videos are coming from Gene Kim. Now, Gene Kim comes out with a video just like an hour ago, acknowledging that our argument in James is justification before men. Okay, what does Gene Kim, what does he do with that? He says that people were saved in the Old Testament by justifying themselves to men. Justifying themselves to men. Really? You heretic. You're a teacher? Let's listen to Gene Kim tell us all about it, how we're justified by men. Oh, and going forward into the tribulation too. According to these idiots.
Men look at you on your works, and depending on how they, and by man's righteousness, not my standard of righteousness.
Really?
But on man's standard of works and righteousness. You're going to have to be judged that way and go down here. See, that was their salvation. That makes a lot of sense.
No, it doesn't make any sense. How you treat your neighbor depends on is how you get to heaven or hell in the Old Testament and in the tribulation. And according to this guy, I'm going to go through this whole video eventually. Right now I'm a little worked up because he does go through our arguments. This idiot says that people in the Old Testament were saved based on how they treated other people. Saved by conscience. God had nothing to do with it? Oh, that's where the faith part comes in somewhere. Somewhere. It all has to do with their works.
Why the Old Testament saints had to wait after Jesus died, then they can get out and go up, because now God's righteousness is right there. Because use your head right here. If you want to argue that they were saved by faith alone, then you didn't have Jesus' death on the cross.
So
they don't have God's righteousness.
God knew that the cross was coming. God knew the cross was coming. He is telling you, man saved man. That's what he's telling you. Man saved man. How you treated your neighbor. David's in hell. Had to be. What did David say when he's sinning? People don't understand this. You think you do something bad, you lie to somebody, you think you've wronged that person. No, it's a sin. A sin is unto God. Yeah, you treated him badly. Sure. You owe him an apology. The sin is with God. David said he sinned against God after what he did to Uriah. But I'm supposed to look to man for my justification, for my salvation. Who is Adam looking to? Who is he going to prove his works to? Or did Adam have faith that he would be redeemed through his offspring? Nutcase. You people out there, you need to get a refund from PBI. And you have this whole deal with the tribulation. I watched Ed's video and he said that Peter Ruckman taught that people would go to Abraham's bosom again during the tribulation. It all comes back to this idea here. So in the tribulation, we're not justified before God. We justify ourselves before men for salvation. So we can go to Abraham's bosom for some reason, even though Jesus has died on the cross. These people are ridiculous heretics. They don't even know what they're talking about. And they teach in schools?
His standard. And if you reject works, then you don't have man's righteousness and standard. Then what are they going to do?
Who cares about men?
So
men can't be righteous. We can be counted for righteous. There is no man righteous. No, not one. What difference does it make what my neighbor thinks about me?
Sin has to be punished and judged. So what did God do? He understood that. That's why he put them here in a temporary basis by man's standard of righteousness. Because he has to judge sin. Whether you like it or not, he has to judge sin. But he can't be so cruel just to send them to hell because Jesus didn't die yet. So what did he do? He went by man's standard of righteousness.
Man's
See,
standard of
that's
righteousness.
why when you argue justification before men, that just proves Old Testament salvation.
See?
They had to go by man's standard of righteousness.
This is what's happening. We are having our argument and putting it out there saying you guys are nutcases. And they are the only ones who teach this. Anyone in the KJV camp, most people in other camps, nobody teaches this stuff. There are a few Christian groups out there who teach the Jews themselves specifically saved by works in the Old Testament. And they don't know what happened to the Gentiles. That is the doctrine I'm familiar with. This stuff is insanity. Why don't you just throw out your entire Bible, just save the stuff that Paul wrote, because that's the only stuff that apparently matters. Justified by men for salvation. What a nut.
Man's works for their salvation. That's why it makes sense. Paul said later on, we're not saved by man's works. We're saved by what Jesus did on the cross.
Gobbledygook.
But remember, look, church age history is only 2,000 years.
Gobbledygook. Gobbledygook. Now you're going to bring Paul into it. They want to have Paul in a different shelf all the way, Paul is just for us, and it's all just Paul, and all just faith, and all this. And then the rest of the Bible, that's all working. We're all working. And apparently we're working not to God, we're working to other men. So we're doing, the sacrifices in the Old Testament, those were apparently for witnesses to other men.
Time period is twice the times of that. What are you going to do with all of that? So this is understandable. Look at 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 32. Then hear thou in heaven, and do and judge thy servants, condemning the wicked. Look at that. See, the wicked. Remember what Psalm says? The wicked shall be turned into hell, right?
Apparently,
so the wicked people go to hell, to bring his way upon his head, and justifying the righteous, but by whose standards? To give him according to whose righteousness? Is it God's righteousness or his righteousness? See, his righteousness. See, this justification before men only proved our point on dispensational salvation right here. They had to.
So they're agreeing with the point that you have zero contradictions. If Gene Kim agrees with the point that James 2 was talking about justification before men, then there is no problem at all. And he's going off into just nonsense gobbledygook. If he sees justification by men, talking about the same guy, talking about Abraham, justified by faith, and then James talks about justification before men. There is no contradiction there whatsoever. So what is he continuing to talk about? Now we're going to the Old Testament. We are justified salvation-wise by men. Well, now we're back to the old problem with Abraham then, aren't we? Was Abraham justified by faith or was he by works? According to Gene Kim in the last video I did, Abraham was justified sort of by faith, and God knew that he would become righteous when he did the work, because God could see ahead. Predestination. Now we're on this thing where everybody is saved by works and by their conscience towards other men in the Old Testament. You ever heard anything so nutty? Peter Ruckman School of Blithering Idiots. No refunds.
Go by man's standard of righteousness that time. That's why, don't you think it makes a lot of sense that if they were going by flesh's standard of righteousness that time, and that's why it makes sense Paul called the law of Moses the law of...
Fleshly how is flesh righteous? That's where your sin lies. How can your flesh be righteous? Anywhere, at any point in time, until you get into the millennial kingdom. You people get their glorified bodies and stuff. Huh? How can your flesh be righteous? I'm justifying myself to some other dude?
The flesh, many times. Don't you see all of this? And whatever their flesh did outwardly, God counted that as their salvation. The Jews are a fleshy, physical people. And notice all of that distinguished, different from the church, who is a spiritual nation. Our salvation is not by...
Okay. So he's basically saying that everybody is then saved by works, and the works is not works for God. These works are works untowards men. So, people in the Old Testament were saved by following the law, apparently. then everybody has to be in hell because no one could keep the law. Adam didn't have anyone to prove himself to. Who's judging him? Judged by conscience, universalism. This is frustrating. This guy gets paid good money to teach this garbage. And I can understand Gene Kim. Here, he has to stick up for this stuff because he's affiliated with PBI. These other guys who have gone away and graduated from PBI, why are you guys still teaching this garbage? You don't have any excuse. You're not beholden to PBI for a paycheck or anything like that. Why are you teaching it? Why are you teaching it? Do you guys out there who went to PBI, do you agree with this nonsense that you're justified by men for your salvation? You believe that? You believe that? You know, there were some other things that I wanted to do. I wanted to do my Bible basics things today. I wanted to do some other things. And then this nutcase comes out with this crap. And I got to put this up. Now, I got to go through, and I have sitting on a whole bunch of stuff about the Savior, Lord and Savior, Peter Ruckman, and what kind of a guy he was. Because someone was nice enough to put all of his question and answer and all of his videos up on YouTube. You can see what kind of a guy this guy was when he was doing his questions and answers and the kind of things that he thought about races. This guy that everyone holds as beholden as this great, magnificent man of God. Tired of this. Tired of this stuff. Blatant wicked heresy. Blatant as you can get. Cults don't teach stuff this bad. Gene Kim is the #1 guy for heresy right now in the King James camp. Completely. Brian Denlinger's off, in cuckoo land, cult land, off the rails, and no one takes him seriously anymore. Now it's Gene Kim. That's what I got to say on that for right now. I'll probably do commentary on the rest of the video, but I'm sure probably Ed is going to get to it. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. But you heard him. That's in around 24-minute mark. We'll listen to it again. And he said right at the beginning of that, and I repeat, this is what we're doing. I repeat, we're justified before men for our salvation to go to Abraham's bosom because we couldn't go to heaven. So he acknowledges you can't go to heaven because Jesus Christ had not died and risen on the cross. Does that mean that's the only reason they didn't go to heaven? But before that, in order to get into Abraham's bosom, they had to be nice to men for their righteousness, a.k.a. getting into heaven. See, now, if you take away the cross completely, all right, if you just take that away completely, they would effectively be going to heaven. We're not waiting for the cross. You know what I'm saying? It's probably not a very good way to explain it. But they're justified and righteous people in Abraham's bosom. And once the cross happened, there is no more Abraham's bosom. Nobody goes to Abraham's bosom, nor will anybody ever go to Abraham's bosom. And this idea that in the tribulation now you're saved by works and faith again, what works are you going to add to that cross? Apparently, you gotta be nice to your neighbor or something. And he's the one who's in charge of your salvation, not God. We'll try it again here. Listen to
our
him.
Fleshy deeds and efforts, but by the spiritual work of Jesus Christ and his righteousness, the Holy Spirit.
There we go.
And in hell, that's where all sin goes, right?
All sin goes to hell? Where is this?
They had a place of
Chapter
comfort
verse.
there, whereas the lost people, they had a place of torment in hell. But these people had a place of comfort, Abraham's bosom. So in God's eyes, obviously, he's like, nope, you can't go to heaven because in my eyes, you're unclean. So what I'm going to do then is that I'm going to have men look at you on your works.
Judged by men.
And depending on how and by man's righteousness, not my standard of righteousness.
If it's
but on man's standard.
If it's man's standard of righteousness, then they should go to heaven or hell. Apparently, God's not the judge. See, again, this is a doctrine that Gene Kim whipped up in his head to try and answer the questions that people are like, how do you have works in this system? It's gobbledygook. It's gobbledygook, the whole thing. And, you know, I might go through the entire video. I want to get this one up while his video is still fresh. And, yeah, with that, we're going to be out of here.